You're welcome to my channel. I want to speak today on setting materiality thresholds. In audit, materiality is a very important concept because 100% audit is not often possible unless it's a small organization. That's where you can audit everything. So most of the time you have time constraint, then you have cost constraint. So uh, those two factors, they always limit the possibility of 100% testing. So because you can't do 100% testing, then that means you have to use sampling methodologies. So we use materiality thresholds to determine what should be examined in detail by the auditor. So that's called substantive testing. So substantive testing means detailed testing, test of balances, test of transactions. Did the transaction actually occur? Are they valid? The amount, is it correct? Is accuracy? And so on. So a lot of questions will be answered through substantive testing. But you don't do substantive testing for every transaction. Like I said, for a very big organization, it's just factually impossible to test every transaction. So we need to set materiality threshold, and often materiality threshold will depend on the size of the transaction. Most of the time is the amount that we look to set materiality. And of course, that will differ from organizations to organization. Okay, for example, what is material to a microfinance bank might not be material to a commercial bank. What is material to a commercial bank might not be material maybe to and a company, maybe an oil and gas company like maybe Chevron or Shell. So it actually varies from industry to industry, from sector to sector, from company to company. So you cannot just use a materiality threshold across all organizations. So when you are auditing, you need to look at that organization, look at their turnover, look at the size of their balance sheets, the kind of transactions, frequency of transactions, and the rest. So with that, you'll be able to say, okay, uh, a transaction above this particular cutoff should be deemed material. They need to ask more questions. We need to perform more audit tests on such transactions. Then we also need to look at nature of the transactions. All right. Like I said, even though the size of transactions matters, all right, but you also need to look at the nature of the transaction also. All right. For example, a transaction that will have regulatory uh, impacts or implications. So the regulators can come and shut down your business because of that transaction. So it doesn't matter whether it means your materiality threshold or it does not meet your materiality threshold. You have to check it in detail. Right. So compliance related transactions, you have to check them in detail, okay, because of the nature of the transactions. Another type of transactions that may look insignificant but may be important is related party transaction in an organization. So, transaction of the MD, transaction of the executive directors, transaction of the non-executive directors relating with the business. So, those kind of transactions may not be at arm's length, like we said in auditing. So, the auditor needs to check those kind of transactions in detail because it's possible that somebody in the organization will be abusing his or her powers or rights or position in the organization. So that is why we don't just use size of transactions to determine materiality. We also use nature of the transaction to determine materiality. So as a word of caution, certain transactions that raise suspicion should be detail checked, even if they don't meet the materiality threshold. So, because like I used to say in fraud classes, that every fraud has a signal, and a lot of time when you discover a fraud, that fraud is a pointer that other frauds have been occurring. So you don't just discover a fraud, oh, this fraud is just minimal, and you just ignore it. By the time you start asking more questions and you start using forensic techniques, you may discover that the fraud, in terms of amount, in terms of uh, time it has been happening, in terms of department covered, in terms of the amount of the number of people involved, you may be shocked that it is a serious case. So we need to be able to investigate and data check and perform substantive procedures on transactions that are suspicious, even if the the amount did not reach the materiality threshold. So thank you once again. My name is Akinwale. Try and subscribe to my channel.